How's it going, everybody? I've got some more Magic for you today with a Golgari Massacre deck. I have been trying to make something interesting and different than what everybody else is playing, and there are some elements in this deck of things that you'll see from pretty common Golgari decks, but I thought it was well beyond time that we throw together a new Massacre Girl deck. So the entire theme around this deck is the cards with Massacre in their name, essentially. We've got Massacre Girl, which is a 4/4 for 4, with creatures you control have Wither. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, if its toughness was less than 1, draw a card. This is very foundational for this deck. Most of our removal is intended with this in mind. So I'll get more into that in just a moment. But we've also got Massacre Worm, which was reprinted in Foundations. Very fun, very good removal that pairs fantastically with Massacre Girl. It is a 6-drop, 6/5. When this creature enters, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn, and whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. So, if you have Massacre Girl out on the field, then play this. Any creature your opponent controls will get -2/-2, meaning that the Wither effect on any of your creatures attacking could kill a good number of creatures on your opponent's side if they haven't already died just to the -2/-2, and any that die not only will deal 2 damage to your opponent, but will also draw you a card because of Massacre Girl. We've got really good other cards that pair with this. Meathook Massacre 2, admittedly, isn't as good as the original Meathook Massacre would be in this deck. But that being said, it is another Massacre card. It is fun and not used very often, so I decided to throw it in here. When Meathook Massacre 2 enters, each player sacrifices X creatures of their choice. Whenever a creature you control dies, you may pay 3 life. If you do, return that card under your control. With a finality counter on it, and whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, they may pay 3 life, and if they don't, return that card under your control with a finality counter on it. So essentially what that long-winded card description says is, let's start here. You can play the Meathook Massacre 2 card for 4 mana, all black, if you want to, just to get the benefit of having whenever your creatures die, you can pay 3 life to have them come back with a finality counter, or whenever your opponent's creatures die, they can pay 3 life, and if they don't, you get that creature with a finality counter. So it prevents things from going into the graveyard, because they would potentially get exiled from the finality counters, or your opponent is taxed in a way to where anything of theirs that you kill, either with any of your removal, with the Wither counters for Massacre Girl, whatever means you do so, causes them to have to pay life to keep you from having that creature. So it's really fun, paired in this deck. And if you do pay into the X, you get the benefit of forcing sacrifices. Now, this can cause you to have to sacrifice a creature of your own, but even just doing that isn't a big deal because you can just pay 3 life to get it back. And your opponent is then forced to sacrifice creatures as well, and they'll have to pay life to keep you from getting it. Now, this is an enchantment, so anytime anything dies, other than just when you cast it, this ability can still trigger, so it stays on the board persistently to deal with that. Now, getting to Massacre Girl, like I said, foundational for this deck. All of our removal, we've got Virtue of Persistence, which is -3/-3 until end of turn, and you gain 2 life, while also having the ability of bringing creatures from the graveyard to the battlefield under your control at your upkeep. We've got Massacre Worm, which deals the -2/-2 to all of your opponent's creatures, which is fantastic because it doesn't even hit your own creatures. And even if it did, it wouldn't be that big deal. We've only got 1 creature that would actually be killed by this. We've got Harvester of Misery, a really good card as well. It is a 5/4 for 5 with Menace. Whenever Harvester of Misery enters, all creatures other than it get -2/-2. So this can affect your own creatures, but as I said, that's not a big deal since the only thing that actually gets hit from that is our Llanowar elves. Everything else would still survive. But you can also pay 2 and discard Harvester of Misery as a 2-drop -2/-2 removal instead. So really fantastic synergy there as well. Good creature, can potentially hit the whole board. Is better than something like a Choking Miasma or something like that, because Choking Miasma does an exile effect, so it wouldn't trigger Massacre Girl. We've got Sheoldred the Apocalypse. Not been seeing as much of Sheoldred in the more recent sets. I guess people are trying to do more interesting and new things. And I agree with that. I think that's great, but Sheoldred fits so perfectly in this deck because we also have the card draw effect of Massacre Girl if she gets to stay. So extra card draw is obviously fantastic for Sheoldred. It gives you the opportunity to gain 2 life. And card advantage is fantastic, as well as we've also got Glissa the Sunslayer. Glissa has the ability to, if it deals damage, it can remove 1/1 counters from target permanent. This can be really good if your opponent has a Archfiend of the Dross on the battlefield. You can remove the 1/1 counters from it if they decide not to block Glissa, and just win the game really easily that way. And that card's very popular right now with how often people are playing demons. And then you've also got the draw card and lose 1 life. This is really good paired with Sheoldred as well, because it's another card draw effect. And then you also have destroy target enchantment, and enchantments are huge right now. We have things like the Overlord of the Hauntwoods, the other Overlords. Honestly, most decks are running some kind of enchantment. You've got a lot of the white enchantments, like I can't even think of what it is now, but the talent that lets you draw cards whenever you get a token enter the battlefield. You've also got the enduring creatures that are all enchantments. So Glissa has the ability to blow up a lot of different things. And then another fantastic feature of it is a 3/3 with First Strike and Death Touch, so it's very difficult to block this card. It needs to be removed quickly by your opponent, so it draws very much aggro quickly. We've got our other removal, Nowhere to Run. Really fantastic card, another -3/-3 card that could potentially kill your opponent's creatures and give you advantage with card draw from Massacre Girl. It also has Flash, so you don't have to play it at sorcery speed, and you get the ability to remove hexproof or other ward abilities on your opponent's card, which is very important in a lot of matches now, especially if your opponent's playing something like Boros enchantments, any kind of mono red with extra steps, like if you're playing mono red that's running green for Snakeskin Veil, if you're playing mono red that's running white for Shard Mage's Rescue. This card just shuts them down completely. It's really fantastic. You can also still run into Orzhov enchantments, Azorius enchantments. You can run into decks that are running things like Valgavoth that gets rid of the ability for it to sit and require you to sacrifice 3 permanents to target it. So very important card. We've got Stab for small creature -2/-2 for 1 mana. This card actually comes in handy more often than not. Gets rid of things like Deep Cavern Bat, gets rid of a significant amount of mono red creatures, especially on turn 1 for them if you get to go first, or even if you don't. In a lot of situations, this is still a good retaliatory card to destroy creatures. And then we've got kind of the things that I was saying is in most Golgari decks right now. We've got 4 Llanowar Elves, which is really essential in this deck. Trying to run it without it is really rough, so I recommend very highly that you use these. We've got Up the Beanstalk. We do have a pretty significant amount of 5-drop cards, even if they're not always 5-drops. We've got Harvester of Misery, which can be a 5-drop or a 2-drop. We've got Overlord of the Hauntwoods, which can be a 5-drop or a 3-drop, but even if you impend it for 3, you still get the card draw. We've got Massacre Worm, which is a 6. We've got Virtue of Persistence, which is a 2-drop or a 7-drop. When you play it for the 7-drop as the enchantment, you get that extra card draw. And we've got Meathook Massacre 2. You can play it as a 4-drop, which would not trigger the Up the Beanstalk, but even if you just pay 1 for X, then that makes this a 6-drop, so anything where you're paying in for the X, it will draw you an extra card. Then going over here, we've got a pretty standard sideboard package for Golgari. This is very similar to what you will have seen with most of my Golgari decks for sideboard. We've got Dreams of Steel and Oil, Duress. These are very good cards for when you're playing up against a more controlling matchup where your removal is less useful. We've got Choking Miasma. As I said, it doesn't work well with Massacre Girl because it does have the exile effect. However, you may be running into a matchup where you really need that early board wipe. So I do still have it as a form of sideboard card. We've got Scavenging Ooze for when you're playing up against those Reanimator type decks. You could also use Ghost Vacuum if you prefer, but I really like Scavenging Ooze in any kind of a green deck, so I use it in the sideboard. We've got a few more Terra Sunder in sideboard. We do use it in the main board, but sometimes you may just need more enchantment removal. We've got Deadly Cover-Up for those matchups where maybe the -2/-2 isn't good enough and you need to outright wipe the board. Having those is really nice. They do trigger the Up the Beanstalk, so very good card to have in sideboard. And then we've got a couple of Planeswalkers with Vivian Reed and Nissa. Both have the ability to destroy artifacts and enchantments, so if that's what you're up against, they can be very important. They're harder to remove because they're Planeswalkers instead of creatures, so when necessary, they can be a really good sideboard card in any kind of a green deck as well. And then land is pretty standard. We've got an even assortment of swamps and forests. You really do want swamp very predominantly in this deck with so many mono black devotion cards, but you do need the green also for Overlord of the Hauntwoods, so I still have it even. We've got 4 Blooming Marsh, 4 Llanowar Wastes. I'm running 2 Restless Cottages because we don't often want a lot of tap lands, so I'm running 4 tap lands total. I've got 1 Temple of Malady and 1 Underground Mortuary. If you want my honest opinion, I think Underground Mortuary is better, so you could run 2 of it, or even maybe 3 of it and 1 Cottage, or 3 Cottage and 1 Underground Mortuary. I did it in this assortment because I only have 1 of each of these lands, so I just threw in 1 of each because why not? Anyway, I will be playing best of 1 like I normally do, going for 3 wins. Hopefully you guys enjoy this deck and I can get some good videos to showcase it. It is a little bit boring in standard right now, so hopefully this deck can kind of spice things up a bit since it's different. But yeah, I'll go ahead and get into matches. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. Alright, opponent goes first, which is pretty sad. Our land is very slow, but we do have several overlords to at least help us ramp. I guess I'll probably keep it. Alright. Looks like our opponent's keeping 2, playing against a mono black. Gonna be another deck just going on discard, no big surprise there. Could rush out the Llanowar Elf, honestly it just doesn't help anything. All of our land are tap lands at this point, so better off just getting the tap lands out now. We can play our Llanowar Elf, actually, so I will go ahead and get that out also. I completely forgot that I could even play it this turn. Cut down, no surprise whatsoever. Alright, we get going here with our Overlord. So we're going to have quite a bit of ramping going now. We could potentially play an untapped Overlord next, but there's honestly no point to it. Go ahead, play up the Beanstalk, draw another card, and get Glissa going. They'll probably have the removal for it, but it's still probably my best option here. Looks like they did not have the removal for it. Pretty surprising. Let's go ahead and tear asunder the Slasher. Now if they don't kill Glissa, we can kill the Bellmark Overlord. So that actually went pretty nicely for us there. We do have 6 land here, so what we can do is impend both of our Overlords on the next turn, and that would actually be pretty nice. I'm going to go with a Swamp, because we have so much Black Devotion we need. We already have 4 green sources. Okay, play a tapped land, cast an Impend Overlord, draw a card, it's gonna hurt. Do it again. A little bit of pain from the land, a little bit of pain from Shieldred. Attack in. If they don't block, we can use the remove counters from one of these new Overlords. Yep. And that will allow us to have 2 Overlords coming untap or as active creatures on this turn. Unstoppable Slasher is pretty ignorable. Go ahead and go here. Let's kill the Slasher. Play a Virtue of Persistence. Draw another card, which will hurt. Another Gliss is pretty nice. Attack here. I think with both of these is fine. Shieldred is going to block our Overlord, which is pretty good for us, actually. I'm just going to remove counters from Shieldred. Or no. Let's remove them from our Overlord so that it can come in untapped. Or not untapped, come in active as a creature now. We do lose an Overlord, but that's not a big deal. Honestly, this gives us access to their Shieldred, which is what I want. Yeah. So we got an easy win here. Didn't get to do anything fun with our Massacre Girl or Massacre cards whatsoever, but you can see the strength of the foundation here, even with us taking a significant amount of damage from this Shieldred because of how many cards we drew. It's still just, we had a huge advantage, and him not having a means of dealing with our Glissa was honestly really debilitating, because Glissa has so much action she can do here. She has the Destroy Target enchantment option, which got rid of their Mailmark Overlord. She has the card draw effect, which I wanted to avoid in this case just because we were already drawing so many cards and taking so much damage from Shieldred. And then the removing counters option to get our Hauntwoods going faster, because we were able to just play them for the Impend, get extra card draws, get extra land, and get them active as creatures really quickly because of Glissa. Anyway, that's a good game 1 win. We'll see how game 2 goes. Alright, we do get to go first. We have a Blooming Marsh, Llanowar Elves, and some Overlords, so this is a pretty good start. Okay. Our opponent finally joined, get that Llanowar Elf down, may get killed. If it does, that's not really a big deal. Most people are running black, though, to kill it. waiting to see if our opponent's awake. Okay, so they did have a creature instead of going full removal for our Llanowar Elf. That's kind of surprising, but we're going to go ahead and get a Overlord going so that we can ramp up as much as possible. The next turn we could play play one out as a creature instead of impending it if we want. Decided to get rid of our Llanowar Elf now, which is honestly fine. We did what it needed to do, so having it now isn't really even, it doesn't matter. Looks like this is going to be a sacrifice deck primarily, which is fine. I'm not terribly bothered here. I think what I want to do, I'd like to get Overlord impending, but we only have enough mana to do so much. So I'm just going to pass on this turn and probably use my Nowhere to Run on the Hexmage. Okay, looks like he's going to attacks. I'll go ahead and just hit Nowhere to Run on the Hexmage. He may sacrifice it, which if he does it before Nowhere to Run picks a target, that would be bad for him. Okay, let's see if he sacrifices the Hexmage now. He does not. He doesn't have something in his hand to sacrifice with. And that honestly just helps us getting rid of that now. Looks like he may be running into some mana issues. Heartfire Hero. I could exile that, but honestly, I'm not sure it's even worth doing. It's gonna make it a 2-2. It'll be a 3-3 because the counter it'll give itself. So maybe I should exile it. Just shut him down. I think that's actually what I want to do, especially since I drew a tap land. So let's just get that gone, not have to worry about it. Get a little more progress towards our Overlord coming out. Obviously now we could cast our other Overlord and have two of them in play. It wasn't entirely necessary to get rid of the mouse. Could have waited until his turn to do it in case he wanted to try pumping it again. But I thought with the tap land and everything, it was just the most efficient way for me to go ahead and do things right now. Stalactite Stalker does have Menace, but if we play two, or if we get two Overlords going, that's not really a big deal. Do I want to do that, or do I want to draw a card? Honestly, I want to draw a card. Another Nowhere to Run is fantastic. We don't have the land to play it on this turn, but that's still really nice. Well, and if we draw a land, maybe. Okay, so he just went ahead and gave up. No real surprise there. He wasn't doing much. I was doing a lot to really keep him off of any usable tactics. These Scornblade Berserkers are really nice in sacrifice decks, but he really needed an engine that was going to play off the sacrifices. Something like Braids, or I don't know. Just, I don't really know what he was going for with this deck in the long run. I could have played more defensively, I suppose, by playing this Overlord as a creature. That way I'd have two available as a blocker, but at the same time, I'm not that afraid of getting pinged for little bits of damage over and over. I'm still at 16, and we're only just getting started here. Got this Nowhere to Run, which was going to be another good removal card for this deck. So yeah, I don't like this guy's deck. I don't think it was the right way to be playing Sacrifice. Alright, opponent gets to go first. We don't have any of our ramp stuff here, but I think I'll still try this, because why not? Good turn one play with the Temple. This is going to be a enchantment deck from our opponent. Since we drew a Llanowar Elf, I'm going to go ahead and play it because it lets us get Glissa going right now. Or, well, on our next turn if he doesn't kill the Elf. Yeah, I'm going to ignore that because I don't care. Glissa is going to be fantastic if they don't have an answer to it, because we're going to be able to just keep blowing up enchantments with it. Okay, go ahead, another Blooming Marsh here, get Glissa going, great blocker, also good attacker. Go ahead and get one more Marsh going. We're going to attack with Glissa, which could end up resulting in her getting exiled in some way. Doesn't look like it. Draw a card, lose a life, that's fine. Let's go ahead. I want to get rid of one of these, if I can. If I can't, it's no big deal. Because he didn't have a Shard Mage's Rescue, which is kind of surprising. But that lets us heal up a little bit. I expect a Sheltered by Ghost to get rid of our Glissa. Nowhere to Run is fantastic here. I'm going to go with Temple because we already have 4 mana. I don't want that land. Let's attack with Glissa. Draw a card, lose a life. Massacre Girl's pretty fun. Do we want to try that? I think what I want to do here, actually, is going to be Nowhere to Run. Going here. No longer have to care about the ward, and then Virtue of Persistence here. So even if he has a Shard Mage's Rescue or something along those lines, we no longer care. Given some power to his armadillos, and then he quits. So, a little bit quicker games today with this deck. Not the best showcase for it, I don't suppose, but you can see if you get the right lineup of things going, your opponent is just going to sit around and not have anything that they can do. I use removal pretty aggressively in this deck because there is so much of it. And mana ramp just matters. Like, we wouldn't have been able to start dealing with these ward costs if it wasn't for this Llanowar Elf on turn 1, and since they're playing green-white without an exile effect, they didn't have a way to deal with it. And by the time, by turn 2, we had a Glissa out because of that, and that is a much scarier thing that you want to try and get rid of before a Llanowar Elf. We had a backup Glissa, we had our Massacre Girl to start really affecting the board by giving us those wither counters and stuff, so this went really well, but didn't get to showcase the deck as nicely as I'd like. But try it out for yourselves, guys. It's a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for joining me.